Fiona.
Thanks everyone for the opportunity to speak. I feel like I'm in a room of people with vast expertise and amazing stories. So part of what I want to do for the next 45 minutes or so is to give you some information which might be new, some which is new to my organisation as well, some new work we're exploring, and then perhaps have a conversation towards the end about options and possibilities for closer collaboration between lawyers and people that are working with intersex, trans and gender diverse people and young people. I bring apologies from Anna Brown, who's from the Human Rights Law Centre. She was going to come and speak a bit more specifically, as Garvey alluded to, on some of the human rights law work that's happening in this space more broadly. She is an expert on that area and I am not, so I'm not going to try and fill the gap left by Anna. She did say that Garvey was going to be here and that he could speak as authoritatively as her on those particular topics. And that Garvey and Anna in fact work quite closely together on a number of projects. I've also put down some literature that Anna and a group of people have been working on, the Saying No to Homophobia campaign, and I can give you contact details for the Human Rights Law Centre if you want to pursue any specific avenues around human rights. But what I want to talk to you about today is some work that my organisation is doing on looking at social determinants of health and then effective partnership between legal providers and health professionals, building on a model in the US called the medical legal partnerships. I think it's an area where there's a lot of potential to assist in effectively addressing the needs of people that are experiencing disadvantage, marginalised or vulnerable. Not just addressing individual needs, but as Garvey mentioned in his remarks earlier, addressing some of the systemic issues that you see causing people to experience marginalisation. I'll just give you a little bit of background. Yes, I am a lawyer, as Sally said. Are there any other lawyers in the room?
You're on the margins.
Yeah, very marginalised. Well, you know, lawyers are a marginalised community, subject of a lot of abuse. My personal favourite lawyer joke, scientists are using lawyers rather than lab rats because there's some things that a rat just won't do. I'm happy to hear others. Most people have got their personal favourite. So much maligned area of the profession, some of it deserved and some not. And one of the reasons it's not deserved, I think, is the kind of work that my organisation does, which is to work with lawyers who work, you know, full-time in their day jobs, but also have a passion for social justice and who volunteer their time and do pro bono legal work to assist people who would otherwise not be able to access justice. And that's what my organisation does, is make those connections and run programs that facilitate that kind of work. We're particularly known for a couple of programs, one for people experiencing what was at risk of homelessness, and we run a number of outreach clinics, including one here in Geelong, that are staffed by pro bono lawyers. We're doing some similar work with older people, looking in particular at the issue of elder abuse, and again placing outreach clinics in agencies that work with older people in aged care facilities, nursing homes, community health centres, and staffing those with pro bono lawyers that we train and supervise. We also, in the course of that work, like to keep a track of areas where people that are disadvantaged or marginalised are missing out on access to justice, to try and highlight areas where perhaps we might develop a new program or we can support somebody else who's doing work in that area. Over the, over the years we've looked at the unmet legal needs of prisoners, of Indigenous Australians, of asylum seekers, and of the LGBT community in Melbourne. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we're also interested in identifying more effective ways of using the law to respond to disadvantage. And so, I'll talk about some interesting connections that are emerging between legal problems and socio-economic problems of disadvantaged and marginalised groups. Excuse me, I'm on the end of a cold. And I'm really interested, as I said, in a bit of a discussion at the end about what you think about whether that might be a useful thing for the work that you guys are pursuing. Some of this work that I'm going to discuss might not be new to you, and some of you may in fact know a lot more about it than me, so I'm not myself out as an expert in social determinants of health at all. Now, I'm going to give you a very quick thumbnail of what is interesting from a recent WHO survey from my work, but so I apologise in advance if there's any experts on that topic in the room. Those of us that have been working with people who are experiencing disadvantage or marginalisation, I suspect have often had a hunch that legal problems impact on people's health and well-being, and that people's health and well-being can lead to or cause legal problems. So it's always good when there's academic research that supports a hunch, and there's been a lot of that happening, particularly in the last couple of years. So one of them, as I mentioned, is a WHO report on the social determinants of health released earlier this year, called Closing the Equity Gap, Policy Options and Opportunities for Action. Has anyone seen that? No? Good, I can pretend to be an expert on this one then. It's a very large report, but a couple of bits of it that in particular jumped out to me and the people that I'm working with in this area. The problem of health inequity, unfair, unavoidable and remediable differences in health status between countries and between different groups of people within the same country. In terms of developed countries, a key issue which contributes to health inequity that the report identified is that people who are socially disadvantaged have less access to services and suffer more illness and or die sooner. And one of the conclusions of the report is that you need to take a social determinants approach to public health programs, that is integrating programs that will address a range of issues that people have. Otherwise, this health inequity will increase. So hold that thought. Earlier, about this time last year, in fact, the largest ever survey of unmet legal need in Australia, and indeed the largest survey of its kind in an English-speaking country, was completed by the Law and Justice Foundation of New South Wales. It's an Australia-wide survey. It's fascinating data that's in there. It's an extremely robust survey with a very large number of participants. Over 20,000 people participated in the survey around the country. And that found, not surprisingly, that people experiencing disadvantage are particularly vulnerable to legal problems, and they're particularly vulnerable to having substantial legal problems and to having multiple legal problems. The survey found that the legal problems are often widespread and they can have a range of impacts on life circumstances. Most people take no action in response to legal problems. Those that do tend not to consult legal advisors. They'll speak to friends, they'll talk to health providers, they'll talk to their neighbour, to their GP sometimes. Young people aged between 15 and 24 were the least likely to take action when they were faced with a legal problem. And when they did take action, they were less likely to seek advice and more likely to handle problems without advice than any other cohort. So that rings some alarm bells if you are accepting that there's a connection between unmet legal need and other forms of disadvantage, and if you're already working with a cohort of young people in particular who you know are vulnerable. The report also found that some demographic groups had increased vulnerability to legal problems, and young people were one of the demographic groups that had increased vulnerability. And the most common legal problems for young people were accidents, crime, personal injury and human rights. So, discrimination and those sorts of things. The survey found that legal problems often have considerable adverse impacts on a broad range of life circumstances. So covering health, financial and social circumstances. And over half of all legal problems had a moderate or severe impact on everyday life. The most common sorts of consequences included stress-related illness, around 20% of people reported that, and physical ill health, as well as relationship breakdown and moving home. And finally, legal problems relating to the family stood out as being severe problems in terms of the categorisation of legal problems that the survey applied. And there were a very broad range of negative consequences that resulted from legal problems related to the family, covering health, financial and social circumstances. So if you think about the sorts of people that many of you are working with and the communities that many of you are part of, I'm imagining that some of that's resonating. You're already seeing these sorts of these challenges that people are facing in terms of their health and their family circumstances, their social circumstances, their housing. This survey would suggest it's pretty likely that there is also a legal issue, either causing, perpetuating, contributing to, compounding the other social circumstances that people are struggling with. So the conclusion of, or one of the conclusions of the law survey is that access to justice is fundamental to community well-being. Now, you might expect a group of lawyers to say that, but my experience in 20 years is that that's what you see again and again, that somebody's housing needs can relate to their social circumstances and their family circumstances, but also there's a legal component to that as well. So that's just one example. So the survey went on to conclude that disadvantaged groups not only have non-legal needs, but are particularly vulnerable to a wide range of severe legal problems and are more likely to struggle with the problems they face. The findings highlight the value of a more holistic approach to justice that provides integrated and multifaceted service delivery across both legal and non-legal services. So the survey really stressed this idea of holistic, integrated, multifaceted services. And it said that it must be integrated to provide more tailored, intensive assistance across both legal and other human services for disadvantaged people who have intertwined legal and non-legal needs. So you can see the parallels between that survey and the social determinants of health research, which likewise concluded that the potential disadvantage of failing to expand beyond strictly medical treatments for health issues contributes to social factors. So you've got the health community saying we've got to look just beyond health in our response to people, and you've got the legal community saying we've got to look beyond the law in our response to people. So both of them, both groups, if you like, are championing more exclusive problems, and not solutions to problems, and not just looking at individual people's needs, although that's obviously critical, but looking at the root causes of inequality and the things that are preventing people from accessing services that will assist them. So you're looking at policies that exclude and deny and discriminate and keep people away. The sorts of things that we just saw so powerfully discussed in the video today. So the WHO talks about intersectoral action. I just love these kind of international bodies. Intersectoral, who uses that? But anyway, intersectoral, I think you know what that means, cross-cutting, connecting. And it talks about tailoring advocacy messages to particular sectors, establishing organisational arrangements that promote ongoing cooperation across sectors, and about institutionalising health equity goals. So that's, again, lots of parallels with those conclusions that I gave you from the law survey. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, the good news is that there are lawyers that have been having these kind of thoughts for quite a while, and if you bump into a community legal centre lawyer who's been around for a while, they'll tell you that this idea of grassroots lawyering, being where the people are, is really at the heart of the community legal centre movement, very much about addressing broader social issues with a very strong advocacy component to the work, as well as meeting people's unmet legal needs. So as I mentioned at the start, people that have been in that community for a long time have had this hunch, there's more to it than just addressing a legal need. And over the last few years, there has been a movement, particularly in the US, to do some really good thinking and structuring about how these kinds of partnerships can work effectively between lawyers and people in the health professions. So in the US, they're referred to as medical legal partnerships, and they started, every movement has its founding story, and the founding story for medical legal partnerships is a doctor in Boston who was seeing young children in a very disadvantaged area of Boston who were presenting with respiratory problems. And one child in particular would come in regularly every couple of months, and he would patch this kid up, give him some more asthma medication and send him home, and he'd come back again and again without any improvement in his condition. And the doctor scratched his head after a while and thought, this shouldn't be happening, this kid should be getting better. And he asked a couple of questions. Well, where are you living? What's your house like? And it turned out that this child and his family were living in substandard slum housing, effectively, and that the landlord that was providing that housing had obligations, legal obligations, to provide housing to a certain standard which he was failing to meet. His doctor was mates with a lawyer and mentioned this to him, and the lawyer said, well, we can do something about that. They're legal obligations and he should be required to enforce those. And so that's what happened. The doctor and the lawyer got together, and the lawyer pursued the landlord, held him accountable according to the law, that housing was improved and the child recovered. So it was one of those kind of aha moments. And this doctor, Barry Zuckerman, went on to develop this concept. He took that experience and that idea and said, okay, what was it that made that work, and let's see if we can replicate this. And so now there's around 95 medical legal partnerships in the US, serving 54,000 patients a year at 250 healthcare locations around the country. They focus on children, the elderly, veterans, people with chronic illnesses. So it really came out as recognition of this Dr. Zuckerman that a lawyer could help patients navigate the complex legal systems that hold solutions to many social determinants of health. And his strong belief, based on his experience, that a doctor and a lawyer together have the best chance of keeping a patient healthy. So there's a whole range of ways that this model plays out according to the context, but there's three core elements to it. One is obviously providing legal assistance, but the legal assistance is provided in a healthcare setting. And the idea is that there's a transformational aspect to the provision of legal services in a healthcare setting. The idea is that both the legal people and the health people are changed by that activity. They change the way they think and the way that they respond. And that change works its way through the healthcare setting and ideally up to policy goals at a state and federal level. So the aim of medical legal partnerships is to address key social determinants of health by revealing not just how policy and law can impact health, but how implementation and enforcement of laws, or the lack of laws to enforce, can determine health outcomes for vulnerable populations. So there's a group of us in Australia, some colleagues at my organisation, at Monash University, at the Lodman Campaspe Community Legal Centre in Bendigo, looking at adapting and integrating this approach in Australian context. We're calling it Advocacy Health Alliances to give it a slightly broader focus. We think that it's got application beyond a pure kind of medical setting. But it's building on exactly the same principles that you see in the US model, and the same understanding that those of us that have been working in this space for a long time have about the intersection of these sorts of issues. So the aim again is for lawyers to work with healthcare providers to deliver better outcomes for clients and patients, and to coordinate and co-locate the work of lawyers, social workers, doctors and others to get better outcomes. So those three core components are the provision of legal assistance within the healthcare setting, trying to focus really on the early identification of potential legal problems by healthcare professionals, so you can get early intervention happening, which can prevent both legal crises and medical crises. One of the examples is, and there's in fact an example of this working in Australia at the moment at the Women's Hospital in Carlton, wanting to focus on a particularly vulnerable population, newly arrived migrant women from the Muslim community, some of whom can struggle with family violence and finding a safe space to talk about that experience without the men in the family being with them. And the North Melbourne Community Legal Centre realised that one place that they could actually speak to these women is through the Women's Health Clinic at the Women's Hospital. And so there's a co-located legal service there where the Community Health Centre work very closely with the health professionals who are working with these women to give them the tools to be able to not necessarily, to help to diagnose not just the women's health problem but also work out if there's triggers for legal problems. So an example would be a woman presents with perhaps physical injuries as a result of family violence, and the health provider will not just ask about how that's happened and how to fix that, but will also think, well, what does that mean for her housing? Is she at home? Is she living with friends? Has she had to move out? What does that mean for her access to social security? Has there been a change if she's no longer in the family home, if the children have been taken, she's now on her own? Is she eligible for payments because she's got sole care of the children? What about the children? Are they safe, and are they accessing any services that they might be eligible for? So there's a few simple questions that can be asked which you can then take to add a legal response as well as the health response. So the second element, as I mentioned before, is this one of transforming health and legal institutions and practices. So the model encourages health professionals to refocus their time with patients to identify issues that can impact on health, as I mentioned, accommodation standards, personal safety issues. Legal professionals work in partnership with healthcare professionals to identify and address legal needs of patients through the delivery of training, development resources and so on. And then the final element of the model is policy change, as I mentioned before. You can really have some great influence on policy to improve the health and wellbeing of vulnerable populations through advocacy and through combined advocacy of health professionals and legal professionals. So from our point of view, in the legal community, we're excited about this work because we can see ways that it's a way of providing a kind of holistic response that the WHO report and the law survey call for, and it recognises what we already know, that people's problems are interconnected, and one intervention won't lead to lasting change. So it can facilitate easier access to services for clients as well, patients, if they've got one person who's able to direct them, rather than the referral roundabout where people are being sent off to all sorts of different places by different people. So you get clearer signposting, and all of that makes it much easier for people to actually access the service. Again, encourage earlier intervention, so problems don't compound. As I mentioned before, it can provide a way into particularly vulnerable or marginalised communities for legal services providers where there wasn't one before, and that example I gave you from the North Melbourne Legal Service is a good one, I think. And then the advocacy elements, we're really excited about the potential for change that might happen in that way. At PILCH, we have, as I mentioned, a program for vulnerable older people that wasn't started explicitly on this medical legal partnership model, but we are moving the way we do that work to move away from simply co-location to actual deep partnering with our providers. Co-location is great, but you don't get the broader benefits that I mentioned in terms of change in institutions, and the broader policy change is more difficult. There's a few things that are required for it to work. It's not simple, like a lot of, well, it's a simple idea, but it requires commitment and resources from both the health providers and the medical providers. As I said, it's more than simply co-location. So these are some of the sort of 7 keys that the US experience suggests are really important for it to work. Joint planning is really critical, and that needs to be at quite a deep level and across an organisation. So not just, okay, there's a room down the back next to the broom cupboard that the lawyer can sit in when they come in, but actually having the lawyers and the health advisors around the same table as they're thinking about strategic planning and work planning, so that the sorts of decisions that are made are informed by what's going to work for both groups. The priority setting is really important to identify the health and legal needs of the key populations that you want to try and focus on. And again, I guess that comes back partly to the joint planning. Communication, of course, is really key to it, and feedback, so that you're getting efficiency and effectiveness across disciplines, and building the trust and cooperation, which is really at the heart of this model. There are issues to negotiate in terms of how clients' patients' right to privacy and confidentiality is managed. Both medical and legal professionals have that at the heart of their ethics. It plays out though in slightly different ways for each profession, and there is work that needs to happen and a commitment to work through those issues of how you manage that and do that in a respectful way as well. And that's the issue that the lawyers will raise straight away when you talk to them about this model. The first thing they will say is, confidentiality, I can't say anything about a client to anyone without that client's permission, and even then, not necessarily. So that's an issue that needs to be worked through. As I mentioned, the legal services need to be on site and not down the back in the broom cupboard, but somewhere where they're going to be effective, both for the client but also for the health providers. There does need to be training. I totally agree with Gabi that training is not the answer to everything, and certainly not on its own, but there does need to be training both for the lawyers to understand the health context, and also for the healthcare providers to just have those simple tools to identify legal need and refer patients. There needs to be evaluation and planning around improvement of impact, so that this process improves. So there's some of the key elements, I think, that you need if you want to aim towards this integrated approach that really is aiming at critical, efficient, shared problem solving among health and legal providers. So that's a bit of an outline of the approach that I want to share with you. Are there any questions about, I've sort of given you, a very quick overview of quite a lot of material. Are there any questions in terms of the content? And then I'd like us to have a bit of a conversation, because I'm interested in what your response is to that. Benefits, challenges, I can think of a couple opportunities to work together.
Yes, thanks. I guess mine's the obvious question, and I'm sure it's the next step that you're planning to discuss with us, but in terms of the issues that came up in that video and some of the issues that we've been talking about in terms of access to care, etc. I don't want to put you on the spot, but Gabi might be able to comment too around opportunities for that partnership to exist, to progress some of those areas. Thanks.
What do you mean by opportunities? Do you mean in terms of...
With the medical legal partnership?
Yeah. Well, I think that's what we want to...
Around barriers and,
I'm hoping we can talk about that now. What do people think are the opportunities and the barriers? Yeah, I think from the legal community side, this is an area of real energy at the moment. So my organisation, along with the other partners I mentioned before, about this time last year ran a symposium to just see how much interest there was. We had, probably 50 people on our contact list, maybe not even. And we sort of sent out this flyer saying, we're exploring this model, we're really excited about it, if you're excited, let us know. And we had 200 people turn up. And a quarter of them were not lawyers, which we were very excited about, because we had, I think, one person on our list initially who was not a lawyer. So it got out into the medical community, and that has continued. The momentum and interest has grown. A woman rang me from Cairns, actually, when we had set that up. And she was so excited because she'd been thinking about this stuff and doing this stuff herself sort of on her own. And she just said, I can't believe that there's a community of you talking about this. This is so exciting, can I get involved? So I think that, there's a lot of momentum around it. We've actually got a very small amount of funding from the Federal Attorney General's Department to progress the development of a network the Advocacy Health Alliance network, what we want to do really is to promote this model more and to develop some very simple tools to encourage people who want to try and get it going in their healthcare setting. You know, a 5-slide PowerPoint presentation that you could take to the, you know, the head of the paediatric department at the hospital you work at. This is what the model is, this is what's a good idea, you know, can I start working on it? So simple things like that can sort of seed it. So from the legal side, I think there's definitely opportunity. But what we need to hear much more from is from people, from the non-legal people, if you want a better expression.
It's the US model that you're talking about showing legal people joining things like Medico grand rounds, and because you said it's more than co-location. Are they becoming encompassed in that Medico team?
Yes, they are. Yeah, that's right. They become, the bonds become very strong. Yeah. So that's some of that kind of joint planning and strategic direction stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
Cameron, you've got a question over here.
I guess I'm just wondering about, has any of the legal work sort of taken on challenges that communities face against the medical system?
Yeah.
And representing them, because I guess one of the biggest sort of things that we've talked about today is the rights of intersex people, and as being probably the most immediate, and how that can work. But that's kind of not working with the profession. That's like standing up for the communities.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I'm glad you raised that. I had that on my list of challenges. That was the one. Well, there's two actually, and they're kind of the same thing, because the other corollary to that is that people don't think of lawyers either as someone that they would necessarily go to. The legal community doesn't always have a great reputation for people who are vulnerable and marginalised. I think that the model as I presented it, and the US one, is very much based in you know, a traditional healthcare setting like a hospital, and working with psychiatrists and doctors. One of the reasons in Australia we're calling it Advocacy Health Alliance is because we want to be much, much broader than that kind of medical setting. So it could be working with you know, a network of support, a support group network for intersex, transgender, diverse young people, saying, okay, well, let's think about when we're looking at the issues for this community, how we can integrate a legal component into that. So the same principles in terms of what are the legal issues that people in the community have, but how can we also have an eye on the broader change that needs to happen. It doesn't have to be in a hospital setting. So I think that, there's two answers. That's the first part of the answer. I think that there's opportunities for it to be much broader. So the sort of work that Suzanne does with GASP, you could actually have a lawyer that is part of the work she does to think about, well, okay, how do we make sure that there's early intervention happening for legal problems that young people have, but also working on joint advocacy together, which brings in an understanding of the legal systems as well as of other ways of getting change. In terms of the question of challenging the health system itself, there's some work happening, and again, Anna Brown, who I mentioned before, and the Human Rights Law Centre have been doing some of that work. There's been some work done. Again, Garvey's probably more across the detail of it than me even, but that work is happening. But I do think it's a challenge that has to be thought about. Yeah, how would you best do this co-location? Yeah.
Front.
Sorry, I'm from Shepparton, and we have our community legal centre there. And
Brand new one. Very exciting.
May know Kaz Gurney.
I do know Kaz, yes.
Yes. So as a case worker, we have case clients, and some of that is working with other agencies and working with our legal centre.
Yep.
So we're already doing that on a local level.
Yep. You are, and Shepparton CLC is awesome. It's brand new, as I said, and it was seeded by the Loddon Campasity Community Legal Centre in Bendigo that I mentioned before, and Peter Noble, who was at that time the principal lawyer of Loddon, is one of the key drivers of this medical Legal Partnership Advocacy Health Alliance. So it's no surprise at all that the person who's from Shepparton CLC is saying, yeah, we're kind of already doing this because, yeah, they are. So, yeah. And that's been the good thing about the network, because people have been kind of going, oh yeah, we're actually doing this. And we're great, tell us what you're doing, let other people know, share what works and what doesn't work in the model. So yeah, that's great.
It works.
Other question? Brenda?
Do you see the involvement of lawyers and the GASP team or whatever as being on a voluntary basis? So is it all going to be pro bono, or are you expecting that part of the allocated funds, which are in demand, will need to be cut to include legal aspects?
It's a good question. Are we cutting the pie into smaller slices, or are we growing the pie? I'm the CEO of a non-profit, so I'm a firm believer in growing the pie. I think that the answer to your question is it's both. There are certainly lawyers who will volunteer to do this stuff, without a doubt, and I'd be really interested in exploring what that might look like. But I also think that there is a potential to grow the pie with this stuff, because government is always on about early intervention and prevention and that kind of stuff, except when they're building new hospitals. And you can make a very compelling case, an economic case for this. So, yeah, maybe I'm Pollyanna, but I think that there is a potential to get funding from different sources. Collaborative funding across government departments, I think there's a potential for, if you've got the stomach for it. Attorney General's Department and health departments, for example. You can get them talking together, as I say, if you can get in there and battle hard enough. So I'm very conscious of that issue of not wanting to pull funds away from other places. So the money that we got from the Attorney General Department did not come from the same bucket of funds that funds community legal centres. It came from a different bucket. I don't actually know what bucket it was, but it wasn't the community legal service program bucket, and yeah, we're quite clear about that. So we're careful about that. I think the potential is there to certainly philanthropic funders, which is a place we often, in my sector, look to for new ideas. They're very interested in this because they are always into collaboration and they're into innovation. So you can tick both those boxes with philanthropy. Once you can demonstrate a model that works with philanthropy and then take it to government, we've been reasonably successful with that approach. So, yeah.
Other question? Down the back, Ricky.
I was just wondering, for trans youth, it's obviously a big problem in the Australian system that they have to go to the family court to get approval to get access to hormone blockers, and it costs up to $30,000 each time. So would you see any role for your organisation in that?
Yeah, we can assist with legal representation in some cases.
The recent
Has been updated.
sorry, I think there's been a bit of confusion recently because WA is an exception, but there has been a recent case. It's called the Reed Lucy decision, and as of that decision, other than WA, it's very important for everyone here to remember, because I know that over the past couple of days I've heard a lot of confusion. As a result of that case, you no longer, except in WA, should have to go to a family court for any hormone blockers, which is called stage 1 treatment in the court decision, which I've read. And basically that means that it's a decision between a family, the young person, and the doctor who's prescribing it. That is really important for everyone here to be clear on. You do not need to go through the family court, except in WA. Thank you, Trish Langdon. And Trish Langdon can speak to the situation in WA.
Well, just that the WA Family Court follows the precedents of the Australian Family Court, so that it is likely that so the same thing will happen. But the difference in WA up until now has been that people all of the cases that have gone before the Family Court have actually been fully funded by legal aid, so there hasn't been the cost that other people have actually had in other states. So, and the other thing is that when they've made a decision in WA to start hormone blockers, it also meant that cross hormones could start down the track. And I think the law is unclear as to whether that there'll still be a requirement pre, say, the age of 16, for that people will still need to go to family court to get a decision to start cross-hormone. So so that's it's a bit more nuanced than that.
So I think if we separate hormone blockers and hormones, we can say that at the moment the situation is looking really good legislatively. In terms of that precedent being set, I think there's no need for further legislation or precedent on hormone blockers. We just need to get that knowledge of that case out there and make sure people are applying it in practice, which they're not. And then as far as hormones go, that's a separate issue. There have been 2 or 3 recent cases. What I can do, once we have everyone's emails for this network, I can prepare a brief for, as people in this room also have briefs, and I can prepare a short brief. We did have a press release about this from the Alliance, but I don't think it was widely covered. It was covered by a few people in the media, but I can make sure that people have access to the information about those cases, because I think it will help people know how to apply this better. Just a really quick thing on these alliances. I think when we talk about inside health profession, outside health profession, and these collaborations across sectors, what's really important to note is, as well as about lawyers, people in medical and general health professions are not monolithic. They don't all have the same opinions. I was under the impression that the Australian Paediatric Endocrine Group had one opinion based on their submissions to the Senate. I then had my sources who attended their meeting who heard tons of dissent, tons of disagreement. In fact, many professionals who were quite uncomfortable with some of the normalising surgeries that are being done. I think the difficulty, the challenge is to identify those people within professions who are not happy with business as usual, whether we're talking about intersex, trans or gender diversity, and use those people to make allegiances across sectors that then makes them more able to influence their own sector, because on their own it's more difficult. Once you get more people involved, you can do that. One of the projects that Anna Brown and I have been working on, which it's not ready yet, is something called the Gender, Body and Relationships Passport. And this was based on a request from the DHS LGBTI working group to me, because I'd mentioned using it when I previously ran an organisation overseas that did direct service. Now this passport is designed for multiple uses, partly intakes, partly facilitating conversations with new people coming into a service, generally a health service. Police in New South Wales are interested in using it. I've now heard police in Victoria are interested, and a number of hospitals and other people. And this collaboration was that I sort of, as a last minute, after all community, I'd put it through all these different people and added tons of stuff and taken away stuff. I then thought, no, you should ask the legal people. So I sort of went through, and Anna Brown's name was recommended to me, by Corey Earlham, and I already had a relationship with Anna, so I sent it to Anna, and Anna has now facilitated that Ashurst are doing a full legal review of this passport so that it can have evidentiary uses in care settings, and that's a really good example, so that we're not just talking about people based in places, but if you see that a certain type of thing is needed and it's missing, then there's this collaboration. So, I've met with Anna Brown, I've met with someone who's representing Ashurst, and there's going to be really something good, a few months from now coming out of that you'll be able to use, that also has something in it that facilitates this conversation, so that if you wanted to do a formal will that would be legally binding, you have that information on who it would go to in your state in terms of your property. A lot of people in these communities die intestate, meaning without a will. So I think there's opportunities to solve structural problems, and that's why I'm saying training is great, but look at structures and what's missing from the structures, and these partnerships can help.
Let's go. Are there more questions?
I would just endorse those comments of Garvey. So my organisation can help with that kind of stuff too. So if you do in your daily work come across people that you think there is a legal problem and you don't know where they might be able to go to get help, there are lots of avenues actually. There is legal aid available for some sorts of issues. Community legal centres are a fantastic resource, and there will be one wherever you work. But if those sources can't help, then PILCH often can. And we have got a cohort of lawyers that we've been working with over many years who have a real interest and understanding of issues around the LGBTI, gender diverse, intersex, trans community. And so that, it's not a matter of just kind of a random lawyer that we've assigned to. We can do it in a pretty thoughtful kind of way. So there's stuff that can happen for individual people, and that all builds understanding and knowledge to look at systemic issues. One of the key things I think that I think is really powerful in the alignment of lawyers with other professions is that lawyers, a fundamental principle of legal practice is that you take instructions from your client. So long as it's within the bounds of legal ethics, you do what the client instructs. So a lawyer doesn't say, well, actually, that's probably not in your best interest, and doesn't make a whole lot of professional judgments about what will be good for that person at a personal level. The lawyer will say, well, the law says you can do this, this, or this. Which one would you like to do? If you do this one, this may happen. If you do that one, but you choose. And that's incredibly empowering for people. We see that a lot with our clients who have been homeless. They bounce around the system. They've constantly got people in bureaucracies telling them what's best for them. And they come to us and we say, well, what do you want to do? And some of the stuff that they will say, yeah, probably their social worker or their case manager might not think it's a great idea, and they probably curse the lawyers sometimes, but it's actually very empowering for that person to go, and I've seen them, I've actually had clients, they sit up and they look different, they put their shoulders back and they kind of go, I get this now, this is really good. And with the pro bono lawyers it's even more fun because often the clients are seen in the office of the fancy law firm where the waiter comes and gives you a cup of tea. And so, some of the clients I had were fantastic. They worked this out and they would, have their order ready before they came and sat into the room about what they wanted. So there's something really a little bit unique about the way that the lawyer-client relationship works, which I think has some power in it that could be harnessed as well. So,
I might just add a few thoughts of my own. This is where I can honestly say some of my best friends are lawyers in response to lawyers' jokes. There's someone who works in my day job, one of my accounting day jobs at youth law, who are really great. Jill, which my friend, then also based at the Front Yard in Melbourne and have lots of coexisting services. Fitzroy Legal Service and St Kilda have GLBTI services. As mentioned, Kaz Gurney, trans woman, is based at Bottom Camp Caspian, has been a bit of a pioneer. And to find out the best community legal centre, either generalist in terms of location, specialist, the Federation of Community Legal Centres website, and then you ring them and they'll sort of work out where to send you to. So that's HRLC.org.au. So Fiona, thank you so much. Networks, alliances, really important. So.